I want to talk about a theme that keeps coming up, and it's come up on these live streams before. We've talked about it. We've talked about it from different angles before, but I've been thinking about it much more deeply than usual. And I just want to reflect on this because it's very interesting in light of certain historical events that we have discussed, in light of certain events that have happened in the world recently, and in light of events that have happened directly within our organization and our own interactions. This is very, very, very important. There's a moment in American television history. I'm not sure what year it happened. Let me find out. What year did this happen? I think it was 1961. 1961 that this happened in American television history, but I want to get it right, right? Yeah, it was 1962. There was an important classic moment in American television history, and I'm going to show this moment. And if you don't know the context, it won't make sense to you. But I think many of you will. It's just a classic moment in American TV history. And I'll explain the context after showing the clip. Here you go.
Chambers, don't get on that ship. The rest of the book, To Serve Man, it's a cookbook.
No, no. Yeah, you ever see that clip before? That's a classic moment in American TV history, and it's much more important, I would argue, than people realize. So, the storyline of the episode, classic American television, it's a fictional science fiction story. And the story is that a group of space aliens have landed on the planet Earth. They are supplying human beings with a new energy source. They're wiping out world hunger. They're, getting rid of nuclear weapons and bringing the world together. They're doing all this great stuff for humanity. And these aliens are just amazing. And they always ask these aliens, why are you doing all these nice things for people? And they always just point to this mysterious book that they have. And this book that they have is called To Serve Man. People say, oh, wow, they want to help human beings, to serve man. And so, after the space aliens have done so much for humanity and provided so much healthcare and wiped out poverty and expanded the human life expectancy and done so many amazing things for the human beings, some of the human beings are going to go visit the home planet that these really nice aliens have come from. And they're going to go visit the home planet, and they're loading up. But as they're loading up, this woman who works with a scientist have started decoding their book, To Serve Man. And of course, I'll play it one more time. This is what they discover.
Don't get on that ship. The rest of the book, To Serve Man, it's a cookbook.
No! Right. So you thought the aliens were being really, really nice. You thought they were just trying to help people. You thought they were just trying to help people. You thought they were just trying to do the right thing. And it turns out they were actually planning to eat you. They were planning to eat you all along. The reason they were doing all these nice things for human beings is because they wanted to fatten up the human race so they could eat them. Now, that moment in television history, it was very much an anti-communist message because the Communist Party of China had taken power in 1949, the 1950s. They were building up China. The slogan of the Chinese Communist Party was serve the people. So this was very much an anti-communist illusion, right? Anti-communism was the bee's knees back then. Everyone was into anti-communism. And anti-communism was all over American television. So the message was these communists, they say they want to give you free healthcare and free jobs and education. They say they want peace, but they actually want to eat you. That's what the message was, right? Is that the communists, they promise all kinds of nice things, but in reality, they are going to eat you for dinner. It was an anti-communist message. However, it's much, much more than that. I would argue that this moment in American TV history points to why American society is deteriorating right now on a psychological level. On these streams, many times, I have talked about the economic roots of the breakdown of U.S. society, the problem of overproduction, the tendency of the falling rate of profit, the elimination of human labor from production and the assembly line, the inability of the worker to purchase what he produces, the irrationality of the profit system. We've talked about that. We've quoted from Nelson Peary, from Fred Goldstein, from Sam Marcy, from Karl Marx himself. We've talked about the economic problems of the capitalist system, the objective laws of economics that are laying out the economic crisis we're in. But there's a reason that the ruling class of the United States can't get it together to mobilize some kind of fascist, strong-armed government to stabilize the country. There's also a reason that we haven't seen the emergence of a real, genuine leftist socialist movement to resist the suffering of the people amid the crisis. There's a reason U.S. society is just starting to move toward deterioration. There's a reason that we're seeing mass shootings all throughout U.S. society. There's a reason that we're seeing suicide on a mass scale, that we're seeing drug addiction on a mass scale. There's a reason for all of this. And I would argue that if you want to know the reason for all of this, you really need to understand this moment in American TV history.
Don't get on that ship. The rest of the book, To Serve Men, it's a cookbook.
No! No!
There's so much in this clip, I don't know where to begin. I'm going to come at this from so many different angles, but that moment in American TV history is so gosh darn important. So gosh darn important. So gosh darn important. I'm going to come at this from a number of different angles. I think the first angle I'm going to come at it from is something that I read in a Marxist psychoanalytical textbook, which is quite hard to find these days. There's a book called The Conditions of Human Growth, published in 1964, written by Saul Newton and Jean Pierce. And it is a Marxist psychoanalytic textbook. And it explains a view of human development that draws heavily from Karl Marx, but also from Sigmund Freud and from John Dewey and from Harry Stack Sullivan. I read this book, and a lot of it didn't really stick with me. I've read various books on Freudian psychoanalysis. I find it to be very fascinating. Some of it I find to be dead wrong, and some of it I find to be right on point. But one of the points that was made in this book, The Conditions of Human Growth, is it had a section that was an analysis of sociopathy. Sociopathy. How do people become sociopaths? Everyone likes to call everybody else a psychopath or a sociopath now. When we talk about sociopathy, we're talking about a specific mental condition in which people don't experience genuine emotions and they don't experience genuine empathy. They don't have the ability to feel empathy for other people. They're kind of indifferent to their fellow human beings. And the point that was made in Conditions of Human Growth by Saul Newton and Jean Pierce, the point that they made in that text was they said one of the key attributes of a sociopath is not simply that they are incapable of feeling empathy for other people. They do not believe that other people are capable of empathy either. Now, let that sink in, because that's kind of a profound thing. And I know there's probably many psychologists, psychoanalysts who would disagree with that. But according to the analysis of Saul Newton and Jean Pierce, two Marxist psychologists, were quite controversial, operating in New York City, 1964. In their assessment, the sociopath believes that everyone else is a sociopath, and that is the key to unlocking how it is they get into this condition. The sociopath believes that everyone else is motivated by pure selfishness. It believes that everyone who is speaking in terms of compassion, everyone who speaks in terms of empathy, anyone who expresses guilt or remorse about hurting somebody else is faking it. That's what sociopaths tend to believe. They themselves are incapable of having empathy for other people. But at the same time that they're incapable of having empathy for other people, they believe that the rest of humanity is in the same category that they are. They have learned, as sociopaths, as psychopaths, to fake empathy, to fake compassion, to fake emotions. That sociopaths go through life faking emotions. They pretend to be angry to get what they want. They pretend to be sad when it is socially appropriate to look sad. They pretend to be happy when it is socially appropriate. But deep down, the sociopath does not really feel empathy. When they're with a group of people who are feeling one way, they're unaffected by it. And they deep down believe that everyone else is like this too. They see emotions and human empathy as just some kind of groupthink, as just some kind of collective behavior that people are compelled to do. And they believe that everyone else is like them, that everyone else is motivated purely by selfishness. They believe that other people don't really have empathy. And what enables them to believe that is that they themselves don't have it. And it's kind of a chicken or the egg question. Is the sociopath like this because they believe everyone else is? Or do they believe everyone else is and that leads them to be like this? It's a difficult question, but that's what at least is argued in that particular book I read. That essentially, when the sociopath sees someone feeding hungry children, when the sociopath sees someone doing something nice for someone else, this is what they see. This is what the sociopath sees. Whenever they see acts of human kindness, acts of human empathy, they look on with cynicism, and something goes through their mind looking a lot like this.
Tip! The rest of the book. To serve men, it's a cookbook.
No! No!
The sociopath hears about great people throughout history, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi. Hears about Joan of Arc giving her life for the liberation of the French people. hears about Jesus Christ getting nailed to a cross. And it's cynical. And it says, I'm not stupid. This was all motivated by self-interest. No one is actually heroic. No one's actually compassionate. No one's kind. No one has sympathy for other people. They're all just being selfish. They all have another agenda. They're all predators deep down. It's a cookbook. It's a cookbook. That's how the sociopath sees the world. This episode of The Twilight Zone, it's pushing anti-communism in the early 60s, is pushing sociopathy and anti-communism on a much more profound level. This isn't just a film about Stalin being an evil dictator or the Chinese communists being mass murderers. This is some heavy stuff. This is a fictional group of aliens that are doing nice things, and it's all just because they want to eat you. Now, it's important to think about that, because I'm now going to bring you to another point. And this is another point that keeps coming up that is very much related. Very, very much related. Julius Caesar. It's a play written by William Shakespeare. And we actually had the honor of having one of our members of the Center for Political Innovation, who's a trained Shakespearean actor, perform one of the famous soliloquies from the Shakespeare play. So I'm going to put that on. This is CPI member Killian. He's performing one of the monologues from Julius Caesar, as one of Julius Caesar's rivals is plotting against Julius Caesar as they're conspiring against him. This is the monologue Shakespeare penned for the conspirator to speak to another conspirator.
Their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings. Brutus and Caesar. What should be in that Caesar? Huh? Why should that name be sounded more than yours? Write them together. Yours is a spare name. Speak them. It doth become the mouth as well. Weigh them. It is heavy. Conjure with them. Brutus will start a spirit as soon as Caesar. Now, in the names of all the gods at once, upon what meat doth this our Caesar feed, that he has grown so great? Hate, thou art shamed, Rome! Thou hast lost the breed of noble bloods! When went there by a time, since the great flood? Yet it was famed with more than with one man. When went there by a time, when those who talked of Rome, that her wide walls encompassed but one man? Now, it is Rome indeed, and room enough when there is in it but only one man. Oft you and I have heard our fathers say, there once was a man that would have brooked the eternal devil to keep his state in Rome as easily as a king. That's it. That's that one.
Now, Shakespeare's play, Julius Caesar, it begins with Julius Caesar rising in his power and prominence in Rome. And the senators, seeing that Julius Caesar is becoming more and more powerful, coming together and conspiring and murdering Julius Caesar. And then Julius Caesar is killed. And then they spend the rest of the play saying, should we really have done that? Because Roman society deteriorates into civil war. Roman society completely deteriorates into civil war. One faction battling against another faction, and there's utter chaos. And they spend the whole play saying, geez, we never really appreciated Julius Caesar. Well, maybe we did the right thing. Maybe we didn't do the right thing. And they spend the play contemplating, was it really worth it to kill Julius Caesar? He had his flaws. He had his limitations. But look what happened. We killed Julius Caesar. And our society deteriorated into civil war. Now, the insight was shared with me that at the time William Shakespeare wrote his play about ancient Rome, he was commenting on current events in Britain. There was a fear that after Queen Elizabeth died, there might be some kind of civil war in Britain. There might be some kind of intense political division. And Shakespeare was kind of warning the British people that, after Queen Elizabeth passes on, we don't want to have what Rome went through after the death of Julius Caesar. And that I've said many times when describing Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, that Shakespeare is grappling with the human relationship to power and authority. We all hate the government. We all hate the government, but we all recognize on some level we need the government. We all, growing up, hate our parents. But on some level, we depend on and we love our parents. And that the human relationship with power and authority is a constant push and pull. We want more freedom, but we also want more order and stability in society. And there's a constant push and pull within human civilization. Will we have more power and authority and obedience? Or will we have more freedom and individualism? And this is a constant push and pull that goes on in human history, and it's constantly being renegotiated. I've made the point many, many times that if the level of civil liberties that we have in the United States is just natural, is the ideal way of being, then human beings must have been just evil until the 1400s in Europe. Because until then, no one talked about life, liberty, and property, religious freedom, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. No one talked about these things. Well, I don't think human beings were just evil until John Locke was born. I think, as someone who looks at things from a dialectical and historical materialist perspective, that human society had not yet developed an economic mode capable of facilitating that level of freedom in society. There's a relationship between freedom and economic development, freedom and stability in society. This is something we have to recognize. And that as the economic base of society changes, the superstructure of society changes, and things like the government, things like the family are renegotiated to correspond with the superstructure, with the economic base. Right? This is an important point. But then that brings me to something that we've also discussed quite a bit on these streams, which is the death of Stalin and the secret speech of Khrushchev. And the secret speech of Khrushchev had the most devastating blow on the global communist movement of anything, I would argue. I would argue the global communist movement has still not recovered from the devastating blow that was delivered by Khrushchev's 1956 speech to the 20th Party Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Khrushchev got up as the new leader. He had just triumphed over Molotov. Molotov was the rival. There were two factions in the Soviet Communist Party at the time of Stalin's death. Khrushchev emerged to lead one faction, and Molotov emerged to lead another. There were two factions, one led by Molotov and one led by Khrushchev. Khrushchev triumphed, and at the 20th Party Congress, he became the new undisputed leader of the Soviet government. So Khrushchev then took his opportunity as the new leader to take a dump all over Stalin, to say many things that were not factually accurate about Stalin. That Stalin was so shocked when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union that he began weeping and crying and hiding under his desk. That's bull honky, right? There are many accounts from people that were around at the time of World War II that say that's not what happened. Stalin was a guy who used to rob banks, for Christ's sakes. Stalin was a guy who carried a gun in his shirt before the revolution. He would walk into banks and point guns and rob banks at gunpoint. Do you really believe that Stalin heard about an army hundreds of miles away and had a breakdown and almost died? That's ridiculous. That's completely ridiculous. But Khrushchev was trying to say to the West that Stalin had not been a good ally against Hitler. And he was trying to denigrate the reputation Stalin had gained as the hero who drove out the Nazi invaders and helped the country and led the country to withstand the horrific events of the Second World War. He was trying to denigrate the image that the Soviet people had in their head as of Stalin, the great leader who had protected the country. Now, there's many other examples of things that Khrushchev said in that speech that were factually inaccurate. There's a lot written about it. Grover Furr wrote the book Khrushchev Lied. He goes point by point. But I'm not totally where Grover's at. I love Grover a lot. I love a lot of his work. I recommend his book, Blood Lies. It's a great book, but I'm not totally where he's at. I'll just be honest with you, right? I'm not 100% there. I'm not 100% there. Because I think, and this is important to what I'm saying here, I think that when Khrushchev gave his secret speech, he was doing it because he saw short-term gain in it. I don't think Khrushchev just gave his secret speech because he wanted to ruin the international communist movement. I don't think that. I don't think Khrushchev was giving his secret speech because he just was an ally of the imperialists. He was just a big sellout revisionist. I mean, he was that. But I think Khrushchev saw short-term benefit in the secret speech. Because Stalin had been the leader of the Soviet Union during really tough years. And Stalin had made a lot of really tough decisions. All right, we have fights in America among communists. Do we have the rally on Friday? Do we have the rally on Thursday? We have fights among communists because we're arguing over who gets to give the speech at our meeting. These people were arguing over who died and who lived. When you look at what was going on during the Second World War, 27 million people died. And they were moving people around the Soviet Union on the basis of their nationality, moving Jews out of areas where the Nazis would come in because they knew they'd be immediately exterminated, evacuating people from Chechnya because there was a pro-Nazi insurgency in Chechnya, forcibly evacuating all the Chechens out of Chechnya in order to defeat the insurgents. These kinds of situations are situations you and I cannot relate to, okay? And we don't know. We don't know what Stalin and the Soviet people were dealing with. The level of death and killing that they were surrounded with, the level of tragedy and hardship that they faced during the Second World War, during the Bolshevik Revolution, during the 1920s, during the period where they were rapidly industrializing. You have no idea. And that is why we should be in awe, in absolute awe of everything the Soviet Union achieved. They went from being an agrarian, impoverished country to launching the first spacecraft into orbit. They went from being a country that was still having horse-drawn plows to mechanizing the entire place, to industrializing the entire place, to building the biggest hydroelectrical power plants in the world, the Dnepr Dam, the biggest steel mills in the world, making more steel than any other country on the planet. They went from a country that was 60% illiterate to being a country that had wiped out illiteracy and taught everyone how to read and write. They built huge new universities. They built huge new hospitals and schools, more hospital beds per capita at one point than any other country in the world. They were training doctors and engineers like never before. They were modernizing and rapidly industrializing amid circumstances that you and I cannot imagine. Hostility. 15 countries invaded them after the Russian Revolution. 27 million people died in Russia and the surrounding countries during the Second World War. And amid all of that, they managed to raise their country up from nothing. And that's nothing short of a miracle. That's nothing short of a miracle. People denigrate this all the time. People say, oh, that's nothing. No, it was something. What the Soviet Union did from the 1920s, the 1930s, during World War II up into the 50s, they achieved astronomical victories for humanity. They did something that had never been done before. Never in the world had you had a socialist, centrally planned economy. Never in the world had you had the dictatorship of the proletariat, except for like 8 weeks during the Paris Commune. And amid so much hostility, up against hell and high water like you couldn't believe, in circumstances that we cannot relate to in the West in any conceivable way, they lifted their country up to perform miracles, to invent space travel, to electrify, to wipe out illiteracy, to build modern industries, to build a modern educational system, to make huge breakthroughs in film. Sergei Eisenstein, the father of the montage, the music of Shostakovich, what the Soviet Union did. We can really only take one thing from it, and that's that socialism works. If they can do that in the face of those horrendous circumstances, with all of that coming down on them, starting out with barely nothing, barely anything, if they can achieve what they achieve, there is no reason we have to have capitalism anywhere in this world. There's no reason we have to have unemployment. There's no reason we have to have hunger and poverty. The achievements of the Soviet Union from 1917 up until Stalin's death are a pretty strong, solid piece of proof that capitalism is not necessary. Capitalism isn't the only way. Capitalism isn't necessary because of human nature. No, if they can achieve all of that under those harsh circumstances, socialism does work. But that's all we can take from it. And that's all we can take from it. That's almost all we can take from it, because we cannot relate to the conditions these people were in at all. And we are a different society, a different culture, a different language, different economic circumstances, different level of development, different history. We are in a completely different circumstance. And what I see so much of is I see people who sit there and they try their hardest to judge. They say, well, Stalin in this year, he signed this treaty and that was wrong. Well, the Soviet Union didn't have the same levels of freedom that we have here in the West. Oh, well, the Soviet Union should have, collectivized this way. They should have done that this way. Okay, well, that's really easy for you to sit there in different historical circumstances and different times and say, coulda, shoulda, woulda. They should have done this. They should have done that. They should have did it this way. They should have done it that way. What they achieved, despite all odds, in utterly hostile circumstances that we can't even imagine, is so astronomical. For us to sit there and go, yeah, well, if that was me, I would have done it so much better. Oh, yeah, well, if that was me, I wouldn't have blah, blah, blah. Well, they shouldn't have done blah, blah, blah. It's like, you hope that given the same deck of cards, you would have done anything close that they did. And we can't relate. We can't relate. And we shouldn't try to copy what they did because it does not apply. It doesn't apply to America in any conceivable way. It does not apply. It has nothing to do with what we're trying to do here in the U.S. It has nothing to do with what we're doing in our American leftist communist groups. It has nothing to do with us. We can't copy Bolshevik methods for our organizations. We can't organize the way the Bolsheviks organized. We can't think that when we come to power, we're going to operate in the same way that they do. We can't. It doesn't apply. It's a completely foreign situation. It's a completely foreign situation. Completely foreign. And that's what we need to take from that. You can have socialism, and socialism does work. And it works under amazingly hostile circumstances. And so under less hostile circumstances, it could achieve even more. But beyond that, we can't take much from it. And that point I have made on these streams so often. But back to Khrushchev. When Khrushchev gave his secret speech, I think he gave it for a reason. And this is what you need to understand. He gave that speech for a reason. Because you can believe when Stalin was making decisions about this group of people lives and this group of people dies, and Stalin was making decisions about we're going to evacuate this area, we're not going to evacuate this area. When Stalin was making decisions about we've only got so much food to ration in the middle of a war, so these people get it and these people don't, you can bet a lot of people got hurt. And you can be sure of that. And the Great Terror, 1936, everyone admits, even Grover Furr, even Stalin's biggest supporters admit that a lot of innocent people got hurt during those years. Those were not good years. What they call Yezhovshchina, the Great Terror, the Great Fear, when a lot of people got sent to prison camps and gulags and a lot of people got executed wrongfully. Stalin eventually executed the head of the secret police, Yezhov, for his mishandling and his misconduct during that whole time. Yezhov, the head of the secret police, was executed because the excesses of that period were so bad. The Moscow trials, which may have been legitimate, I don't know. But regardless, during that period, 1936, 1937, a lot of people got hurt in the USSR. So much so that the head of the security services, Yezhov, got the death penalty for it. And that Khrushchev came to power 1956. And he was thinking, there's a lot of people that are really mad at Stalin. They didn't have freedom of speech and freedom of assembly in the USSR. They didn't. And that while overall people had praised Stalin for his great achievements, and Stalin was the father of the country, and Stalin was, the great leader who had defeated the Nazi invaders, beneath the surface, there were a lot of people, you can be sure, who felt that Stalin had made the wrong decision, who felt that someone had been unfairly treated and Stalin didn't protect them, who felt that Stalin should have sent the food here instead of sending the food there, you can be sure that when you're facing those kinds of circumstances, there's no way that you don't hurt a lot of people. When you're making decisions that have a life and death impact on that many people, and when you're in circumstances where that many people are going to die, and if you ship the food here, the people over here are going to die, and if you ship the food here, the people over there are going to die, there's no way Stalin didn't hurt a lot of people. I think Stalin probably did the best he could with the intent of trying to strengthen the Soviet Union, which was the project he dedicated his life to, with the intent of defeating the Nazis, who were his hated enemies. I think he probably wanted to remain popular and did not want to alienate and make enemies out of the Soviet people. But there is no way that Stalin could not have done a lot of things that hurt a lot of people. And if you understand the way history works and the way leadership works, if you look at Joseph Stalin, there's no way Stalin could have been Stalin and not made a lot of people angry. And I believe Joseph Stalin even said, "After I die, heaps of rubbish will be piled onto my grave." And he was right. He was absolutely right about that. And so what happened? What happened? What happened? Well, Khrushchev was the new leader. He defeated the rival faction. He came to power. And he said, "I'm going to let it all out. I'm going to let it all out. All the people who got pent up anger at Stalin, all the people who feel like Stalin screwed them, I'm going to be the guy who gave them permission to be mad about it. I'm going to be the guy who finally lifted the lid and said it's okay to criticize Stalin. I am going to be the guy who acknowledges these people's grievances. That's me, and that's how I'm going to gain power. And people are going to love me. People are going to love me because I'm going to come along and I am going to I'm going to have the courage to lift the lid and say, Stalin's gone. I'm the new boss. And you know what? That boss who came before me was a shithead." And if you think about it, in the short term, that was probably a very smart thing for Khrushchev to do. In the short term, there were probably lots of people, especially lots of high-ranking Communist Party bureaucrats who had lingering resentment against Stalin, who had feelings deep down within their soul, angry at Stalin, feeling that Stalin had done the wrong thing, feeling that they had been personally affected in a negative way, feeling that one of their friends had been killed wrongfully or someone they know had died wrongfully. There were a lot of people. There's no way that Stalin could have run the USSR at the time that he ran the USSR and not have done a lot of things that a lot of people thought were wrong. And there were probably a lot of people who had deep resentment towards Stalin, but you have to remember, you couldn't say it. If you said negative things about Stalin, you got arrested. Stalin was the great leader. There was a quote-unquote cult of personality. And so these people had all suppressed their feelings about Stalin. If they had negative feelings about Stalin, they suppressed them. They were afraid to even say them. They didn't want to believe that the great leader of the country was bad. And there were consequences if you went around saying it. So there were a lot of people, especially in the higher ranks of the Soviet Communist Party, who had negative feelings about Stalin. You can be sure that they had suppressed. And Khrushchev came along, the new boss, and he got up and he gave an attack on Stalin, an over-the-top attack on Stalin, full of lies, but probably reflecting real feelings that people had. We know he said a lot of false things, but we also know that he probably, there's no way he could have gotten away with it if he wasn't speaking to feelings that a lot of people had beneath the surface. Bureaucrats who felt that Stalin had made bad decisions, who felt that they'd been personally affected in a negative way, people who had wished Stalin would have done something different than what he did. There's no way Khrushchev could have given that speech without at least touching onto feelings that were there beneath the surface. And we know that in the short term, Khrushchev really gained in the short term from the secret speech. De-Stalinization. They called it de-Stalinization. And all over the USSR, people were speaking up, saying negative things about Stalin. People were calling Khrushchev brave and heroic. See, he finally had the courage to get up there and speak against Stalin. Oh, it's so amazing. You know, it was in the short term. In the short term, it was a smart move for Khrushchev. And globally, right, what happened? In the United States, the Communist Party got legalized by the Supreme Court. They put out a pamphlet called Communists Take a New Look, and they said, don't worry, we're not the old Stalin party anymore. We're going to have a convention in 1957. We might even drop Marxism, Leninism. We're going to form a mass party of socialism. All the anger you have at us, all the stuff, all the tough decisions we made during World War II, and you can forget all of that. We're Communists Take a New Look. We're a new party now. We're a new party. We're a whole new party. We're a whole new party. We're a whole new party. And that was the attitude that many communists had. In the short term, Khrushchev probably thought this would help. He said, the Soviet Union, we can start with a clean slate. We can admit that Stalin was bad. We can call out, we can have de-Stalinization. We can all just have all over the country, we can all get up and call Stalin a shithead. We can all get up and say Stalin was evil. All of us who've got feelings, negative feelings about Stalin, we can let them out. And probably a lot of people felt liberated. They felt like, yeah, I'd been thinking that there was something wrong with Stalin. There was something that happened where I really got hurt. And for years, I've been trying to suppress it in my head. And I got to finally let it out. There's probably a lot of people that for the first couple of years there felt good. They felt good. The first couple of years. But what happened after that? What happened after that? Cynicism set in. Because all of the things that the Soviet people had did during the Second World War, all the sacrifices they had made, all the hardships they'd endured, they'd been led in doing so by one man. One man had been the symbol of their struggle. One man's face had been everywhere. I've heard stories that when the Nazis would execute communists, before the firing squads, they would raise their fists and shout, "Stalin!" before they were shot dead. Stalin's face was all over everything. All the struggles to industrialize, to work really, really hard. Stalin was the voice on the radio cheering them on. Stalin was giving medals to the Stakhanovich, the people who worked really hard. During the Second World War, Stalin was the leader who had mobilized the country to fight the Nazis. After the war, it was Stalin who celebrated the rebuilding of the country and mobilized reconstruction, all that they had been through, all the amazing things they'd achieved, and all the suffering and sacrifices that they'd gone through had Stalin's name written all over it. You could not separate those years from the man who was leading the USSR. And what Khrushchev had done was he had told all these people that all that time, everything they were fighting for was a lie. That's what he did. And it may have been relieving to people in the short term. It may have helped them in the short term. It may have let them get their anger out in the short term. But in the long term, it destroyed the morale of a people. It set the very beginning. It planted the opening seeds of the fall of the Soviet Union. And that's why Xi Jinping and Deng Xiaoping have both said they will never do to Mao Zedong what Khrushchev did to Stalin. As much as they're critical of Mao, Chinese Communist Party, their position is that Mao was 70% good and 30% bad. 70-30. That is their official assessment of Mao Zedong. And they said, as much as we're critical of Mao, we repudiate the Cultural Revolution, we will never do to Mao what Khrushchev did to Stalin. And they made that abundantly clear. They watched this in China. And they saw the effect it was having. And they said, we are never going to do this. We're never going to make this mistake. It took a psychological toll on the population. And it set the stage for the fall of the USSR. Because when it really gets down to it, what Khrushchev was more or less telling all these people, when he told them that Stalin was just a selfish, self-serving, greedy, power-hungry tyrant, when he was telling them that all of the mobilizations that they'd gone through, all the sacrifices they'd made were unnecessary, were done, where they were led by someone who didn't care about them, who needlessly sacrificed their lives. This is what Khrushchev was basically telling the Soviet people.
Don't get on that ship. The rest of the book, To Serve Men, it's a cookbook.
No! No!
It was a cookbook. Right? It was a cookbook. That's what Khrushchev did. He told the Soviet people it was all a cookbook. It was all a lie, just so Stalin could prey on you. It was all a lie. And that was a blow the Soviet Union and the global communist movement were unable to recover from. But this gets me to an even deeper point. An even deeper point. Because if you read Freudian psychoanalysis, there are two concepts that Sigmund Freud talks about a lot. The first one is the Oedipal complex. He writes about, there's a famous Greek play about Oedipus. Oedipus is a Greek hero who murders his father and marries his mother. And Sigmund Freud spends a lot of time talking about the fact that there's a rivalry between teenage boys and middle-aged men. In particular, fathers and their teenage sons. When the son becomes sexually mature, he becomes a threat to the father's masculinity. The father is the man of the house. The son, when he's a boy and he's sexually prepubescent, fine. But when the boy becomes sexually mature, the boy wants to challenge his father's power, and the father becomes threatened in his position as the patriarchal head of the household. And this is the basis of the Oedipal complex, where and eventually the idea is that that's what motivates the young man to go out on his own, right? The father is constantly trying to cut the teenage boy down to size. The teenage boy is constantly trying to push back against the father's authority. And eventually this motivates the teenage boy to go out and get married and have children and become the patriarchal authority of his own household. It's kind of a magical cycle. That's what Sigmund Freud argues, right? And that's just natural. Right? And that shows that all of us, to some degree or other, have a desire to rebel against authority. All of us resent having authority imposed upon us. In the case of men, masculine culture, this is a particularly deep thing, right? Men tend to brutally haze each other in fraternities and athletic organizations. There's a lot of power struggles, and this is how men are. Men are much more competitive with each other. Men assert dominance over other men much more frequently. Part of being a male is that men are constantly trying to control each other, trying to assert dominance over each other. This is just part of being male. But then there's another concept that Sigmund Freud talks about, and that's called transference. And that's very interesting. Transference. Sigmund Freud talks about how the psychoanalyst, the therapist, begins to take the role of a parent. Person who's going to see Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalyst, is sitting on the couch. They're talking about their life with the psychoanalyst, and the feelings that the patient has for their parents, they begin to have for the psychoanalyst. They are transferred. This is called transference. And the patient starts to feel a particular loyalty to the psychoanalyst, kind of love for them that is similar to the love one might have for one's parents. And furthermore, the psychoanalyst, in order to help the patient become more mature and break out of their neurosis, is trying to renegotiate and change the way the patient feels about their parent. This is very interesting. That if someone's depressed or paranoid or hysterical or whatever, if they have certain neurotic behaviors, that often it's rooted in how they see themselves in relation to their parent. And that as the patient is suddenly having the therapist, the psychoanalyst, take the place of a parent, the psychoanalyst is getting the patient to think differently and to re-examine and to see their relationship with their actual parent in a different light. This is very interesting in light of Julius Caesar, in light of what I just told you about the devastating role of Khrushchev's secret speech. And then when you talk about an unethical practice or unethical therapy, many times you will see psychoanalysts, therapists who are operating in rather an unhealthy way. Many people have called out Stefan Molyneux, the web commentator. What did Stefan Molyneux do? What's one of the largest critiques of the libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, free domain radio guy, Stefan Molyneux? What is one of the biggest critiques of him? Well, Stefan Molyneux urges his audience and the people who follow him and his life advice to, quote, de-foo. And foo stands for family of origin. And he urges them to cut off their family of origin, to de-foo. And he says that their relationship with their family of origin is the basis of their mental illness. And so that in order, Stefan Molyneux argues, to be healthier, you need to cut off your family of origin. You need to de-foo. Now, this is an unethical practice. I believe this is why Stefan Molyneux's spouse, who advises him, lost her license to practice therapy in Canada. That is completely unethical. Completely unethical for a mental health professional to tell you to cut off your family. But it enables this process of transference to be complete. If you want to have psychological control over somebody, one way to do it is to make sure that other people who might have an influence over them are cut out. If you want to make sure that someone is under your domination, one thing you have to make sure is that you have no competition. And so enabling this process of transference that Sigmund Freud speaks about often involves bad, unethical therapists digging in to people's relationship with their parents and starting to demonize their parents, starting to show their parents in a negative light, so that the therapist can come to replace the parent. And that's not all that different than what Khrushchev was doing. Khrushchev wanted to be the new boss of the Soviet Union. So he needed to denigrate the role of the previous boss. If the people all still loved Stalin, well, Khrushchev, he wouldn't be doing really well in comparison. In order for them to really love Khrushchev, they needed to stop loving Stalin. So for his own selfish reasons, he had to denigrate Stalin. If they're comparing him to Stalin, he's not going to do well. But if you can denigrate Stalin, if Stalin becomes bad, well, then that creates room for Khrushchev to be the new daddy, to be the new boss. This is just like that Freudian transference, right? For the therapist to gain the position of the parent in the mind of the patient, it's necessary for them to denigrate the parent and to appeal to the Oedipal feelings that are within all of us, and to give voice to the feelings that are already there. This is all what I'm getting at, because I'm trying to get you to understand how important this moment in American television was. One more time.
Get on that ship. The rest of the book, To Serve Men, it's a cookbook.
No! No!
The message of that Twilight Zone episode is that anyone who comes along and tries to offer you truth and tries to offer you hope and tries to offer you a better life is trying to con you and manipulate you and really wants to eat you for dinner. That's the message. And that's a message that you tell people if you want to control them. If you don't want them to join any mass movement, if you don't want them to make any new friends, if you don't want them to try anything new, you want them completely under your thumb. You warn them, hey, if anything better comes along, it's a cookbook. It's a cookbook. That's how you control somebody. That's how you keep them under your dominion. You get them to be terrified of the world. You destroy all things that they once held sacred. You tell them that Stalin, who they made all their sacrifices for, was a big liar. You tell them that their parent that they loved was an evil person. You get them in a spot where they're afraid of the world. And then all they've got is you. All they've got is you. And if you look at social media now, so much of the woke stuff is trying to do this. A great example is the J.K. Rowling phenomenon. Right? Put the trans stuff aside. J.K. Rowling, she wrote the Harry Potter books, and the Harry Potter books are what many children grew up on. Right? They came out in the 2000s. Many people who are now in their 20s grew up on Harry Potter. They watched the Harry Potter movies when they came out. They read the books. They grew up on Harry Potter, Now, J.K. Rowling has taken a controversial stand on the transgender issue. But so have many people. She's not the only person. She's certainly not the most prominent person who said things. Many people have criticized the trans stuff and said things similar to what she said, things that are much harsher than what she said. Doesn't matter. By mobilizing the woke people and demanding that they just hate J.K. Rowling, it's not simply about the trans issue. It's about getting them to cancel their own childhood memories. It's about getting them to destroy the values that they were once taught and the beliefs they once held that they got from these books they spent their childhood reading. Essentially, what they're doing with the canceling of J.K. Rowling is far more sinister than just going after somebody for taking a position on the trans issue. They want all the millions and millions and millions of millennials and Zoomers who grew up on Harry Potter, who read those thousands of pages, who watched those hours and hours of movies. They want all of them to every time they think of J.K. Rowling, every time they think of the memories they had from their childhood associated with J.K. Rowling, every time they think of what they reflected on or developed in their mind in relation to the books they read, they want all of that to suddenly be associated with this.
Don't get on that ship. The rest of the book, To Serve Men, it's a cookbook.
No! No!
It's a maniacal psychological operation that they are running. They want to cancel big parts of people's psychology, big aspects of their own identities, big chunks of their memories, big sections of their own values. It's very similar to what they did with Stalin after Khrushchev came into power. It's very similar in many ways to what a manipulative and unethical therapist might do. It's about psychologically destroying somebody by making them believe that things they once valued are phony, things they once valued are frauds. And where does it leave people? Isolated, afraid, cynical. This is a maniacal psychological operation that they are running. It's way bigger than Khrushchev. It's way bigger than the Twilight Zone. It's way, way bigger than psychology. It's way bigger than Harry Potter. This is a maniacal psychological operation they're running. Because when it really gets down to it, as many people have pointed out, the people who dominate modern capitalism are sociopaths. The people who dominate modern capitalism are the most heartless people who have no empathy, who don't care about other people, who only celebrate their own wealth and their own riches. And they don't believe, as I said earlier, a sociopath believes everyone else is a sociopath. A sociopath believes that no one else has empathy. A sociopath believes that no one else is compassionate. A sociopath believes that no one else acts selflessly and in the interests of others. That's what a sociopath believes. And that is how they also operate. They believe that everyone else is like them. And some people think that they may actually become a sociopath by believing that other people are sociopaths too. And that this is what they are doing, as they're cultivating a population for their own short-term reasons, because they want us under their control. They're cultivating a population to view the world in terms of this Twilight Zone episode.
Don't get on that ship. The rest of the book, To Serve Men, it's a cookbook.
They want you to believe that every political movement, every religion, every cause, everyone who calls on you to believe in anything, every truth, every principle, every creed, every mobilization, every mass movement is a cookbook. And the reason that they're cultivating you to think that is because they don't want anyone to influence you but them. They want the control and the power over you. And in order to do that, they have to destroy everything you believe in. They have to reduce you to being afraid of the world. They have to reduce you to the point that you think every cause is a scam, every organization is a cult, Every religion is a lie. Everyone is just selfish and predatory and coming to prey on you. That's what they're trying to get you to think. And the reason that they're trying to get you to think that is because in the short term, that benefits them. Because it allows them to have a total monopoly. If you cut off your parents, if you cut off your friends, if you don't join a religion or a mass political movement, if you're all alone and isolated, if you think it's all a cookbook, then this thing has a monopoly over you. Then this thing is the only thing that gets to influence your mind. And their algorithms and their manipulation gets total dominance. And that is what they are trying to do. And it's benefiting them in the short term. It absolutely is. It's absolutely benefiting them in the short term. They're destroying political movements. They're mobilizing color revolutions to bring down popular governments. They're making Americans afraid to join organizations, afraid to associate with one another, afraid of each other. But they're also creating a cynicism, a hopelessness among the population. They're creating a situation where if World War III happened, very few Americans would go out and fight for them. They're creating a situation where a lot of young people don't feel like getting up in the morning. They're creating a situation where the population has been psychologically raped. Psychologically raped. Far more than what Khrushchev did that led to the fall of the Soviet Union. Look at the mass shootings. Look at the drug addiction. Look at the suicides. This is what happens when you tell a society of millions of people over and over and over again, you drum into their heads that it's all a cookbook. We are living in the results, the long-term results of a psychological operation intended to deconstruct, intended to give us freedom of mind and freedom of choice, intended to make us think for ourselves, intended to combat authoritarianism, combat disinformation. We are living in the aftermath of a psychological operation that is so damaging that the results may take generations to repair. And the only reason they're doing it is because they think it's a cookbook. The people who get ahead in their system are the ones who think it's a cookbook. The people at the top, the people in Congress, most of them, they think it's all a cookbook. They think human empathy is for suckers. They think compassion is a form of weakness, and they think everyone's a sociopath deep down. That's what they think. And the people on Wall Street, they think the same thing. And the people running Silicon Valley, they think the same thing. And they've risen to the top of this system. And in order to maintain their control, and probably because they think it's right, they're trying to cultivate a whole society of people to think this way. They want all of humanity to think the way they think, to just see the light and realize that it's all a cookbook, it's all a lie. I mean, it's this is what you read in Leo Strauss. This is what you read in Friedrich Nietzsche. This is what you read in The Fountainhead and Ayn Rand. This is what they want humanity to believe, and they believe it themselves. And society is now coming apart. Our civilization is crumbling because this kind of thinking has been disseminated on a mass level. The Soviet Union came apart in a process that began with Khrushchev's secret speech and denigrating Stalin. And the United States is coming apart because they are carrying out an operation, an intense psychological operation intended to combat illiberalism, intended to combat any opposition mass movement that is damaging the population on a far higher scale. And I'm just telling you that the only hope we have is we have to work very, very hard to get people to see that it's not a cookbook. Our job as people trying to resist all of this, our job is to show people that it's not a cookbook. Our job is to show people that compassion and kindness are a good thing. Our job is to demonstrate people working together and working in each other's interests. And our job is to also cultivate patience and fight the Oedipal instincts within ourselves that want to break everything, tear everything down when we don't get our way, that want to rip apart communities, that want to cancel people and call them out on social media. We have to fight that within ourselves because we all have it in us. And that's what they're appealing to. It used to be communists appealed to this kind of thing. Communists came along and said, the church is a lie, the government's a lie, the capitalists are a lie, rise up and revolt. That used to be our thing. We used to do that, right? That we were coming out of the French Revolution and we were waving that red flag and we were saying, to the barricades, tear it down, burn it down. That was our thing. We were the ones cultivating destructive, rebellious, Oedipal instincts. That used to be what communists were known for. That used to be our trademark. What happened? During the Cold War, the imperialists figured out that they could use it for their own ends. And that's what Zbigniew Brzezinski in his book about the Technotronic era is about. And that's what the color revolution apparatus is about. And that's what Trotskyism and the permanent revolution is about. And that's what the Congress for Cultural Freedom program is about, is that the left aesthetic, the appeal to rebellion, the appeal to authority, the wrecker instinct is no longer the property of the communists. The wrecker instinct has now been hijacked by the most rich and powerful people, and they are using it, and they are taking it to its most extreme conclusions and running a psychological operation to manipulate the libidinal and Oedipal feelings within all of us in order to atomize us all and break us all down into atomized, isolated individuals. And it's very effective what they're doing, and it's devastating and destroying civilization. We are looking at the death agony of liberalism. Liberalism, the ideology that celebrates individuals above all else. This is the death agony of anti-collectivism, of anti-totalitarianism. This is the death agony of philosophical irrationalism. This is the death agony of liberalism. And that's what we're witnessing. And it's going to have a devastating impact, but it's ultimately going to fail. Because the very nature of human beings is collective. Human beings define ourselves in relation to other people. Ever since the dawn of mankind, when we were hunter-gatherers and tribes in the woods, up through slavery and feudalism, up into capitalism, human beings have always been collective. We are collective creatures. We work together, and collectively, we are tool makers. And we are the only species that has the ability to force the environment to serve us. All the other species simply interact with their environment. But we force the environment to serve us, and we constantly reinvent our relationship with the environment to reach a higher mode of production, to reach a longer life expectancy, to reach a higher population level. Human beings are constantly, with our collective work, reinventing ourselves and reinventing our relationship with nature to reach a higher mode of production. And the very nature of humanity is collective. Human beings are collective creatures, and we will work together and we will triumph. But what they're doing right now, what the cookbook operation is doing right now, is far more devastating and could have very, very long-term devastating consequences. And we all need to be aware of this. And I hope that my rant tonight, I went on a lot longer than I intended. I hope that it has been coherent. And I hope that this made sense. And I hope that these insights helped you to understand how these things work. Because we are facing a civilization crisis. And we're facing the danger of a new world war. We're facing an economic crisis. But these psychological factors are heavily involved. And that is why I am so committed, not just to getting on the internet and talking, but to building an actual community, to get actual stuff done. Because liberalism will eat itself alive, and illiberalism is going to triumph. But the question is, what kind of illiberalism will triumph? And if there's any hope for anything good coming out of the crisis that's coming, it's going to depend on us building a network of people who learn to trust each other, learn to listen to each other, learn to tolerate shit we don't always like, and learn to disagree with each other, learn to forgive each other, and learn to be compassionate toward each other, and learn that we all make mistakes, and learn that the value of being in an organization and cooperating and getting things done outweighs the frustration some of us might have sometimes. Learn the value of solving problems in groups. This is something we have to do. It's never been harder to organize than it is now, but it's never been more important. And all of you who have joined the Center for Political Innovation, joined the Rage Against the War Machine Coalition, all of you deserve a medal, because there's a huge operation going on to make sure you don't. They are doing everything they can to make you terrified of this, to make you be alone and isolated, to make you think it's all a cookbook. They're doing everything they can to isolate you, to atomize you, to inculcate phobias in you. They are doing everything they can to keep you alone, to keep you separated from other people, to keep you afraid. So if you can overcome that, you're a strong person. You're going against the current. And you know what's valuable. You can see through the bullshit. And you realize how serious the circumstances we're facing are. So you deserve to be commended. Anyone who joins the Center for Political Innovation deserves to be commended. Anyone who helps build our anti-war movement deserves to be commended. Anyone who becomes a part of our in real life community that we're building deserves to be commended. Tearing things down is cheap in this time because everything's getting torn down. Everything is getting torn down. Everything's getting canceled. Everything's getting wrecked. Everything's falling apart. Everyone's killing their parents. Everyone's taking a dump on Stalin. Everything's a lie. Everything's a cookbook. But if you can build in an atmosphere that is designed to cultivate wrecking, if you can build and construct in a society that is just pumping you with the wrecker mindset 24/7, you deserve to be commended. You absolutely deserve to be commended. And it is to all of you who refuse to back down and refuse to remain part of this community that I owe everything. And I have deep feelings of love and commitment